Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the 12th Symposio Caribe Plurilingüe. We have a full program here until 3:30 this afternoon. There'll be 10 presentations. Our first one is a post-colonial reading of Elizabeth Núñez's Prospero's Daughter. It's by Adriana de Persia Colón.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Adriana de Persia. I am a student at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, and I'm going to be presenting a post-colonial reading of Elizabeth Núñez, Prospero's Daughter. Okay, the definition for post-colonial theory I'm applying today is by Alistair Pennycook. It's changed, i.e. the one I used for my thesis. It's a little bit more embarcadora, but this one is actually very good also. And I define it as a political and cultural movement that seeks to challenge the received histories and ideologies of former colonial nations and to open a space for insurgent knowledges to emerge, and that is from Pennycook. Puerto Rico, according to Jorge Duany, it's still a colony of the United States, and many people still have this opinion, and they consider Puerto Rico still to be under U.S. rule, but Pennycook's definition is still very much useful because of the intersection between the political and the cultural. And if you're more interested in knowing what Duany has to say, then you can look for his work and many of his articles. Okay. And Núñez's work is, the interpretation I give it is that it's in the Caribbean reimagining literary tradition. It's a reimagining of Shakespeare's The Tempest. And the definition I am giving it for this literary tradition is a post-colonial, it's canonical counter-discourse, and the definition I give it is that it's a post-colonial, when a post-colonial writer takes up a character or characters or the basic assumptions of a British canonical text, and they unveil the assumptions and they subvert the text for their own post-colonial purposes. It's not just about the British canon. They have done it of other canons as well. For instance, the Greek canon and the Spanish. But in this case, I focus on the British because Shakespeare is part of the British tradition. And I also include autoethnographic commentary because I believe that this is one of the most important tools writers in this tradition have employed to share their own experiences and write these texts to share their side of the story so that people can know what is it that has occurred in their lives and in these spaces and places. Prospero's Daughter was written in 2016 and is a reimagining of Shakespeare's The Tempest that was written in 1610, between 1610 and 1611. And in this novel, three characters are the center of the story, who are Carlos, Virginia, and Dr. Gardner, and they represent Caliban, they represent Prospero, and she represents Miranda. And the story takes place in Trinidad, specifically in Chacachacari, but it also mentions and takes place or visits England and the bigger island of Trinidad, not only Chacachacari. And it follows the story of Carlos and Virginia as they fall in love and how Dr. Gardner takes over the house that belongs to Carlos, and he becomes the ruler of the house, which actually symbolizes the land itself. And supposedly at the beginning of the story, Carlos, has attempted to rape Virginia, but the way that Dr. Gardner says it is that he attempted to sexually assault his daughter to protect the image of the daughter and the idea of virginity and of a white English woman. And as I said, Carlos represents Caliban, Virginia represents Miranda, Ariana is another character who represents Ariel, and Dr. Gardner is Prospero, or represents Prospero. Okay? Carlos is born on the island and has no connection to empire due to his skin color, geographical location, and immediate context. He's what Kamal Brathwaite calls an alternative. He was born in Trinidad, but he becomes part of this new identity that forms in the Caribbean. And something I did with this novel is that I try to draw parallels and connections between Puerto Rico's current status with the United States and the character's mental state and physical state, where Puerto Rico, even though was a colony of the Spanish Empire, it was still separated by land to the Spanish regime, and Puerto Rico is now under Spanish rule, and we're still separated by land and by water, I'm sorry, to the U.S. And something or some scholars I use are Brathwaite, Peter Roberts, and Mervyn Elaine, because I think they do a wonderful study and analysis of how is it that race and class intersect in the Caribbean, and they relate it also to geographical location, where you have an island that is supposedly isolated and without any connection to the empire, but the island is still a space and a place that is very much important and the engine of how these empires work. And because Carlos has a brown skin that labels him as black in the Caribbean, he has no access to empire, especially because of the way that his culture is, the different behavior. And in the case of Puerto Rico is also a place that is separated by water, and people in Puerto Rico are still relegated, not necessarily entirely, so it's not a generalization, but Puerto Ricans are still very much relegated to like the lowest social class, and their culture is, our culture is very much still seen as backwards, and that we have to transform to and conform to this imperial idea of Americanization. And Dr. Gardner arrives to Chacachacari and to Carlos's house with his daughter, and establishes himself as God and as Carlos as the devil. So we see how the religious hierarchy works in the Caribbean, where they then establish themselves as the normal, natural, benevolent beings, and then if people try to distance themselves from them or try to rebel or be resistant, then they are categorized as a devil, which very much happens when people try to say something against empires, and people say, oh my God, how dare you speak against these wonderful places and these wonderful lands? And you're like, but don't you see all the slavery, the slave history, and all the treatment that it has happened throughout the years, but people ignore that. So of course, you're ridiculized, or you're ridiculed, and you are very much seen as a devil because you are trying to oppose a certain regime. Okay. Something else I do in this work or in this thesis, is that I trace the transformation that Carlos endures under Dr. Gardner, when he goes from knowing and feeling proud and secure of who he is, to then transforming into what Dr. Gardner wants him to be. So I include a quote that is very important, because it's what happens in Puerto Rico also, is that the first lesson Gardner taught me when he discovered that I could read and decided he would give me means to express my own meaning, was about the right of his people, their manifest destiny to rule the world. His people have brought civilization everywhere, and it's of course manifest destiny that is not only implied but very explicit right there, and it's something still carried on today, not only with the British, but the United States will now carry on their legacy, and very much lived in Puerto Rico, because manifest destiny is implied in our daily lives and through education, and education itself becomes prosperous as we learn. We kind of like forget everything about ourselves, and we learn about imperial histories and the importance and the wonderful histories that they have, and then yet we always learn that we can never amount up to that. Okay. The education I was getting from Gardner was British, it was European. It bothered me, of course, that Gardner rarely mentioned Africa, that he said not a kind word about Amerindians who originally populated the islands. On the rare occasion when he did, he made me understand that my history, the history of my island and the islands in the Caribbean began with him, began with his people. Of course, is the erasure of everything that took place before the Western imperial colonial project made its way, and they brought it to these lands and these places, and when they crossed the seas and oceans. Let me see. Okay. And then Dr. Gardner creates this garden in the back of the house to represent the idea of paradise that he wants to establish. And it's very interesting that in Puerto Rico, we never really learn the relations that these plans have. We never learned that in these lands, or these plans were brought in oceans or across the ocean with a bunch of people who were enslaved. We never learned que el flamboyant es de otro lado del mundo. We never learned our relation to these plants or our relation to nature. And this dichotomy is established where people are above nature and that nature is something to be controlled. So that's something Dr. Gardner does. He establishes this garden and he tries to control nature because to him nature is dangerous. And it's the same thing where, people are then equal to nature, and it becomes very dangerous because once we are equal to nature, then that means we have to be controlled, we have to be tamed, we have to be then transformed to become something completely different, something to their benefit, instead of working in complete harmony. And then it reminds me of The Garden and the Empire from George Lammons in The Castle of My Skin. He has a very amazing portion in that book where he talks about the relation that empire and the garden have to the people and the land and even the waters. Okay. And then, when we are educated with all these connections to empires, not only connections, but when empire becomes everything that we're going to strive for, we find ourselves in all their literature, all their music, all their arts. And even though being connected to all these mediums are wonderful, it's always to the detriment of everything that happens in these spaces, and everything becomes about esta idea de que lo otro y lo imperial es lo superior y lo imperial es lo único que uno puede estudiar, or the only way that you can truly identify with, or the only artifacts that you can identify with are imperial, but then you forget everything else and you're never really taught anything else. So Carlos says that I have found myself in his music and his literature and thought of his art as my art, belonging also to me, but there was nothing in common between us now. And art, music, and literature, not the artist, have been my guide to beauty and to truth, that it was good to what was more reprehensible. He had misused art. He had used it to suit his vanity. Okay? And then Huationgo has a very interesting article where when they try to reform and change basically the educational system in his country, he said, why can't we study all this literature but according to what happens in our context, right? So it's not that we want to eliminate all these influences, but we have to reform, we have to restructure them in a way that the people actually get the context of where they're at. Not that their context will be completely eliminated, which is what has happened for many years. In the novel, Carlos is empowered. Eric Williams, who was the man that led Trinidadians to their independence, he has a bunch of speeches, about Black power and identity when everything was looking good, and those speeches empowered Carlos. And in this case, Carlos and Virginia identify with Trinidad instead of with England once they are. Once they realize that, hey, we're here, we're part of this land has shaped who we are. It's not just about some faraway place, but also from home. Carlos and Virginia fall in love, but Dr. Gardner's plans to marry his daughter to a man from the United States makes Carlos speak up. So when he realizes that he's actually in love with the daughter, he starts trying to tell Dr. Gardner that, hey, I'm in love with your daughter, but Dr. Gardner has, doesn't want anything to do with Carlos, someone from Trinidad, who is somebody who is darker skinned, Black person. Okay? And then Carlos thinks about how is it possible that he stayed under Dr. Gardner's rule for so long. And so he says, I look back now and it amazes me that I allowed myself to be so grateful, that I submitted myself to such an extent exclusively European education, willingly taking the risk of losing faith in my people, respect for the traditions of my forefathers. And he continues to reflect on everything that was his life and that his life is and has become. And so I have a few quotes over there that just help us see his transformation. Okay, this is the slide I want to get to because it's very important what happens in Puerto Rico. And Edward Glissant said this a while ago, and it's very important because I think it continues to happen today. And it's this sly way that colonialism runs deep, and that we don't even realize it. So there is one thing where colonialism runs very explicitly, but there's another way that it runs very slyly and very mysteriously, no nos damos cuenta. So Glissant says that today colonial domination no longer needs the support of a heroic ideology, the idea of a motherland, etc. It is content to control through a passive consumerism and demonstrate its inevitability. It allows the principle of mixing with what's called a French background. In his case, he was talking about French people. And local peculiarities, there's no more opportunities to be missed. So in Puerto Rico, it happens que we're fine with having somebody else say, okay, vamos a mandar, but then as long as they let us, como que nuestra cultura and our little peculiarities, everything's fine. And so this is one of the ways he says, when this happens, we know that mental domination is complete, or almost complete. And Cliff says when our landscapes or our seascape are so tampered with, how do we locate ourselves? How do we, go back to these connections between plants, between fauna, flora, between everything that surrounds us and people who surround us? And how do we renegotiate these identities? How do we move forward? And so Frantz Fanon, and with him I close, he says that decolonization, which is a very much word, very used word today. I have a lot of thoughts about it, and we might need to move beyond that word already. Which sets out to change the order of the world, is clearly an agenda for total disaster, but it cannot be accomplished by the wave of a magic wand, an annual cataclysm, or a gentleman's agreement. So sometimes I think of Fanon, and I think of, these radical words, and we say, pero eso era del siglo XX, ya estamos en otra era. And I find interesting how we say about some scholars que nunca están en el pasado, que los podemos usar hoy día, but then Fanon's words are too radical or too, they're for another century. So I just think about all of those words, and I say, how can we apply them today? How can we really engage with his words in a way that restructures and is truly radical or something like that. And I think that is it. Thank you so much.
All right. Our next presentation is titled Diaspora Writers, Puerto Ricanidad and Transnational Influences in Puerto Rican Identity. It's by Roberto Sanchez Sayas.
Abajo.
Y eso para la audiencia virtual, eso para la presencial. Por favor, denme tocar.
Hablo aquí. Through here? Okay.
Pero tú puedes leer a partir de allá si...
Okay.
Si no, pero aquí está.
Yeah, just in case. I brought it just in case. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roberto Sanchez Sayas. I thank Professor Faraclas and Kuwabong for organizing this. Great. Last time I was here was 2014. It's great to be back here. I wrote a master's thesis concerning Puerto Rican diaspora writers and how they reveal a transnational phenomenon on Puerto Rican identity. Also, how these writers affirm their Puerto Ricanness abroad in the diaspora while revealing these transnational influences. Use authors such as Aurora Levis Morales, Maria Mariposa Fernandez, Rosario Morales. I divided it through chapters. The first chapter deals with the women, authenticity, feminism. The second chapter deals with Miguel Piñero and his defiance of cultural nationalist identity abroad and here, especially here. And the third chapter deals with Tato Laviera's pregón, as I call it, an outcry. He's my favorite because he's a man of color, if you will, a Puerto Rican black man, and he talks about race, but he also talks about Puerto Ricanness, genuine authenticity, like Mariposa does. So first, I'm going to talk about the women and how they enact transnationalism, women, through not only the family, but also the workforce. Women are a pillar of the Puerto Rican society and culture. When it comes to, for example, the Puerto Rican Day Parade, the cultural festivals, anything that has to do with Puerto Rican culture abroad, women are at the forefront. They have also been on the forefront of the labor movement of Puerto Rican society for a long time. They also deal with raising children, and many issues in Puerto Rican society they're not given the credit for. For example, Jorge Duani was my favorite. Jorge Duani, Juan Flores, Agustín Lao Montes are the theorists I use the most in this project. Duani cites Pierre Hondagnu and Ernestine Avila in his book Blurred Borders, Transnational Migration Between Hispanic and the Caribbean United States, in the Hispanic Caribbean and the United States. And he says, quote, "Women are largely responsible for the emotional, caring, and ritual work required to maintain kinship bonds between home and diaspora communities. Through constant visiting, writing, and talking on the phone, women often keep transnational households in touch with each other across long distances and stretches of time, more so than men. Women frequently travel back and forth to take care of relatives, raise children, and participate in their families' rites of passage, such as baptisms, birthdays, weddings, and funerals." What I mean by transnationalism, if you're asking what kind of transnationalism it is, it's the one stated by Jorge Duani and Agustín Lao Montes. Now, there are different kinds of transnationalism. This one is the one focused on Puerto Rican society itself. We're a colony, so we're transnational since 1898, probably before under Spain. I focus on the one under Spain, of course. I'm under United States, of course, in this project. And it's very interesting that Duani talks about Puerto Rican society as a nation on the move, which the vaivén, as he calls it, which I grew up under because I grew up back and forth from New York City to Puerto Rico. Now the diaspora has expanded to Orlando. Orlando Ricans is another term people use. Even California, Chicago, of course. And Agustín Lao Montes, quote, Agustín Montes, this is from Duani, Agustín Lao Montes has elaborated the useful notion of Puerto Rico as a translocal nation whose boundaries shift between the archipelago of Puerto Rico and its U.S. diaspora. Lao Montes further points out that the ultimate territory of Puerto Ricanness is the body of the fragmented subject. That to me is the most important part of this quote. Although I doubt that any nation can be completely deterritorialized, I agree with Lao Montes that it can transcend geopolitical borders of the state, colonial or otherwise. Similarly, I have proposed the expression nation on the move to describe the constant back and forth movement of people between Puerto Rico and the continental United States. Now, what does this mean? That we're Puerto Rican, of course, and we affirm our Puerto Ricanness everywhere we go, but we have to acknowledge a transnational phenomenon on our identity that's going on and that's even expanding. It's even getting broader now after Hurricane Maria. The diaspora is even bigger now. In its beginning, it was only hardworking, working class people, the very poor. Now you see even professionals and doctors moving to the United States for upward mobility. This is happening every single day now because poverty, lack of work, lack of resources. Women are very important in this because they create what is needed to improve the situation of the island. They have also been present in the industrialized work in Puerto Rican society. I'm sorry. Yeah. They have engaged in the social justice plight. I could give many examples, but I don't have that much time. Rosario Morales, Aurora Lenis Morales talk about this in their poem, ending poem, and I quote, "I am a child of many mothers. They have kept it all going. All the civilizations erected on their backs. All the dinner parties given with their labor." Here you have the feminism of how women are important in constructing that society that we love so much and that it's so powerful to us. They also tie Puerto Rican women to affirming Puerto Ricanness abroad, not just men, from the diaspora. Okay, Mariposa Fernandez does this in her poem Ode to the Diasporican, which is one of my favorites, because it talks about genuineness, if you will, or authenticity. There is no such thing, but you have to debate it concerning with regard to the Puerto Rican cultural national identity that's been defended by some people in what me and Professor Stankic call the Criollo Intelligentsia. The Criollo Intelligentsia is a group of people who have a kind of Eurocentric view of what Puerto Rican society should be. Sometimes they tend to exclude the Puerto Rican diaspora. Sometimes they tend to exclude African and other influences that should be counted as Puerto Rican. Sometimes they include too much, they rely too much, rather, on geographical space, birthplace, language. These are very important markers of identity, but they're not the sole markers of identity, especially in an identity that's evolving over time. The authenticity issue comes to play. They could be called the Criollo Intelligentsia, but I coined a phrase in my thesis called cultural gatekeepers. In linguistics, gatekeepers are the people who try to decide what belongs and what doesn't belong. Purists is another word. I use that term because you have to challenge this authenticity debate to decide what's really Puerto Rican. We have certain markers, but now we have others, like the diaspora. Quote from Mariposa: "Mira mi cara puertorriqueña, mi pelo vivo, mis manos morenas. Mira mi corazón que se llena de orgullo y dime que no soy boricua. What does it mean to live in between? What does it take to realize that being boricua is a state of mind, a state of heart, a state of soul?" So she's defying this Criollo Intelligentsia and this geographical space marker, in that she was born and raised in the Bronx, but nevertheless, like she says, my Rio Grande, my Rio Grande de Loíza was the Bronx River, for example. Now I skip to Miguel Piñero. Miguel Piñero is the strongest one. So he's the most controversial and the most outlandish, and I love him because he just says it like it's supposed to be, and has been promulgated. This Criollo Intelligentsia has been promulgated for a long time, right? So Miguel Piñero defies this attitude in his poem. This is not the place where I was born. He uses that sarcastic tone because he was born here in Gurabo, but he left when he was 8 years old to New York City, and he's saying to the Criollo Intelligentsia again, this is not the place where I was born. In other words, it has changed and not for the better. And I say, quote, "This slave-blessed land where New Yorkers come in search for spiritual identity are greeted with profanity. This is insanity that Americanos are showered with shoeshine kisses." This is him criticizing that Criollo Intelligentsia that says, oh, you're not Puerto Rican enough because you were born and raised in New York, or because you speak English, or because you call yourself New Yorican, etc. He's saying, wait a minute, but you engage in American influences more than I do. So who are you to tell me that you're more or less Puerto Rican than I am? He also criticizes that hypocrisy, saying, this is a quote by Adrián Ferreira Veras. She wrote an extraordinary article about his poetry in general. And she says, quote, "He was amazed how Puerto Ricans who had never left the island could accuse him when they allowed the American influences that could be seen all around the island." So it's a matter of engaging with this criollo intelligentsia and this behavior of American influences, not just about geographical space, birthplace, language. Of course, Tato Laviera. Tato Laviera, if Piñero was the bad boy, he was the genius bad boy, as they called him, the outlaw. Tato Laviera was more like the selfless citizen, I call him, because he worked for the society when he was young. He dropped out of college to help other people get into college. This is a man who wrote extraordinary poems like Nuyorican, American, La Carreta made a U-turn. I call it an outcry because the word outcry is a pregón. It's like a plea. A plea that he's telling the island, don't make me suffer because I'm one of your children. Don't treat him like a foreigner. Don't treat me like a foreigner, he's saying. It provokes feelings of anger, necessity that Puerto Ricans are sons and daughters as much as islanders. In one of his strongest poems, in which he exposes this myth of the criollo intelligentsia, is Nuyorican. And I say, quote, yo peleo por ti, Puerto Rico, sabes, yo me defiendo por tu nombre, sabes. Entro a tu isla, me siento extraño, sabes. Entro a buscar más y más, sabes. Pero tú con tus calumnias me niegas tu sonrisa, me siento mal, agallado. Yo soy tu hijo de una migración, pecado forzado. What does that mean, pecado forzado? That many of the people that migrated had to migrate because they were poor, not because they wanted to. They had no choice, many of them. And Laviera's narrative reflects that poverty, that situation that many go through, not just him, many of us, including my family. And I quote from Nuyorican. Me mandaste nacer nativo en otras tierras. ¿Por qué? Porque éramos pobres, ¿verdad? Porque tú querías vaciarte de tu gente pobre. He places a mirror in front of the criollo intelligentsia who pretend to say, oh, you don't know what Puerto Ricanness is because you live abroad and you've been contaminated by the U.S. Cultural influences. So he says to them, and I quote, ahora regreso con un corazón boricua y tú me desprecias, me miras mal, me atacas mi hablar, mientras comes McDonald's en discotecas americanas. I love that part. He's saying, wait a minute, you are a colonial subject just as much as I am. And you engage in these practices as much as I am, as much as I do, whether you like to admit it or not. What I'm trying to say here is that Puerto Rican culture is evolving, and we have to admit these influences, and it's not something good or bad. It's something that's going to happen regardless. Hurricane Maria only exacerbated the diaspora. Now you see professionals leaving, as I said before. You see all kinds of people. So when you have an identity that's getting broader, you have to look at it, look at ourselves and see where we're going with our country. How do we improve it? How do we have a dialogue about Puerto Ricanness, about diaspora, about social mobility? Many of these things that make us a people. Also, in the conclusion, there's a quote by, here it is. Jorge Duani says, that we have, here it is. Jorge Duani says, we must look at the situation of regarding birthplace, language, as the sole markers of identity. That doesn't work anymore. It's not only that, but culture itself. How do we keep that culture alive? Language, culture, traditions, family, many things. Puerto Rican society is now, after Hurricane Maria, changed so much that people, even the criollo intelligentsia is changing. And it's changing about this because I spoke to Bernabe, who wrote a great book with Cesar Ayala about Puerto Rico in the American century. And he told me that yes, that he includes the diaspora in the discussion of Puerto Rican identity because it's the future. And that's where we should be talking about these things, not only in the island, but New York, as they say, is the second capital of Puerto Rico, an extension. And thank you so much. I'll go on, but I'm out of time. It was too much stuff to cover.
That's good. Okay, our next presentation is titled Cuando perreabas, intertextualidad y nostalgia en X100 UPR-RP de Bad Bunny. Por siempre, de Bad Bunny. The presentation is by Edgar Nieves Lopez from here at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras.
Get to advance the slides. This one, and this one is for the virtual audience, this is for the present audience, and please try not to move.
Ok. Ok, pues hablemos de trap un ratito, por 10 minutos. Déjame poner mi timer. Ok, la lectura que hago en esta presentación de Bad Bunny está limitada obviamente por el tiempo, y aunque reconozco que hay varios aspectos que se pueden hablar de la carrera de Bad Bunny que me merecen ser analizados, como su estilo ecléctico, la codificación que él ha hecho del género urbano al introducir la vestimenta. Cabe destacar que el género urbano se ha destacado por lo que de estas camisas de batola, los pantalones a mitad de nalga, y Bad Bunny está introduciendo entonces un estilo más chic de diseñador, estrambótico, que se parece un poco al estilo que utilizan artistas del pop culture en Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y pues su performance para efectos, pero como esto es una presentación breve, pues me voy a enfocar más en lo que es su primer álbum, y más que un estudio, pues lo que estoy haciendo es una propuesta de realizar una lectura distinta de su música que vaya más allá de debates pseudoacadémicos que se han generado en los medios locales sobre cómo su lírica de alto contenido sexual o de explícita o cómo sus canciones, especialmente sus primeras producciones y colaboraciones, continúan perpetuando la cosificación de la mujer en la música. Pero es que cabe recalcar también que no es el único género que lo hace. El trap, como producto de una sociedad patriarcal y capitalista, responde pues a estos intereses, y de la misma manera que lo ha hecho el merengue, la salsa, la bachata, incluso el pop, balada, etcétera, ¿no? Lo que me interesa más bien son dos conceptos, que es la intertextualidad y la nostalgia. En el caso de la intertextualidad lo estoy usando de una manera muy amplia, solamente para denominar lo que es ese acto de hacer referencia o integrar un fragmento de otra canción en sus canciones. Y la nostalgia, que lo utilizo, pues ese concepto de la mod retro o estilo retrospectivo, que pues podemos llamarlo como ese hacer referencia al pasado o a un momento generacional específico, que Frederick Johnson, por ejemplo, pues lo asocia con un valor de consumo. En su ensayo Postmodernism and Consumer Society, Frederick Jameson analiza el valor de la nostalgia en películas como Star Wars, por ejemplo, y sostiene que los nostalgic films, on some first level, children and adolescents can take the adventures straight while the adult public is able to gratify a deeper and more properly nostalgic desire to return to that older period and to live into its strange old aesthetic artifacts through once more. Así que, es decir, que el público más joven, al ser presentado ante un filme de nostalgias, pues recibe la historia tal cual, como una historia simple de aventura. Sin embargo, un público más adulto, en el tiempo de Star Wars, podía identificar las referencias que George Lucas estaba haciendo a películas de años desde los años 50 tal vez. Pues, que son detalles que ese público adulto entonces le permite experimentar un deseo nostálgico de regresar a esa época o ese periodo que está siendo referenciado, y por tanto pues revivirlo. En el caso de Bad Bunny, pues entonces propongo un análisis similar, en donde con sus canciones, en este caso pues hay un deseo nostálgico de volver a un como antes, a un tiempo que alude a un cuando perreabas en un periodo específico. En este caso, pues me refiero más finales de los 90 y lo que es completa la primera década completa de los 2000. Va a haber un valor de consumo en la nostalgia porque me parece que el trap que está surgiendo actualmente se basa en hacer referencia a estos grandes exponentes que pegaron durante la primera década del 2000, que serían Wisin y Yandel, Teo Calderón, Daddy Yankee, Nicky Jam, etcétera, ¿no? Y es algo que ha estado ocurriendo en las canciones de Bad Bunny desde sus comienzos. Por ejemplo, en Soy Peor ya él estaba haciendo alusión a Héctor el Father con el álbum Los Anormales, y Héctor el Father se sigue repitiendo en sus canciones. En Ya Me Acostumbré está la alusión a Danza Kuduro de Don Omar. Tú No Vives Así, la alusión a Vico Sí y la canción La Recta Final. Tú No Metes Cabra, vemos que es él cogió toda una frase de Héctor el Father que él usa en Los Anormales y la incorpora en una canción nueva y que viene de Noche de Travesura. Chambea de nuevo, Don Omar con Bandolero. El remix que hicieron de Loca, en la parte donde él colabora, él hace alusión a la canción de Nicky Jam y Daddy Yankee en la cama. El Vamos a la Calle es el cover completo que él hace de la canción, y más recientemente pues en Dame Algo, que es la colaboración que hizo con Wisin y Yandel, pues menciona Calle 13. Y él mismo ha dado expresiones de cómo todos estos artistas de alguna u otra manera influencian su música, porque es la música que él escuchaba mientras se criaba, que casualmente también es la música con la que se criaba el público que más se siente identificado con su música. Yo presento como una extended edition de lo que para mí es el álbum de Por Siempre, tomando en consideración las canciones en las que yo entiendo él está haciendo alusiones y son las que yo he podido identificar hasta ahora. Me interesan más las que hacen alusión a esa época de la primera década de los 2000, que serían entonces Si Estuviésemos Juntos, que hace alusión a Rakim y Ken White con la canción Down, Solo de Mí, Cuando Perreabas, que es la que voy a analizar más a fondo, y La Romana. Como antes la tengo ahí porque casualmente varios meses antes de salir el álbum de Bad Bunny, pues Wisin y Yandel habían sacado esta canción que también hace alusión a volver a esos tiempos de antes en los que se perreaba, y entonces es de nuevo un patrón que he estado viendo en la música de género urbano, que suele hacer esa alusión al periodo de los 2000, como ese periodo ideal al que se quiere volver. Esta es la lírica de la canción Cuando Perreaba. Yo sé, no da tiempo a ponerla todas, pero me voy a enfocar en la parte donde está esta intertextualidad que alude entonces a una nostalgia. Yo les voy a poner el extracto de la canción donde aparece, que serían las partes que están subrayadas en la proyección. Ok, pues entonces en el primer ejemplo es un extracto de una canción que viene de Plan B, que se titula, es una canción que hicieron con DJ Joe y lo vamos a ver, está aquí en el 18. Fíjense en que es la misma lírica y la misma, él simplemente lo integra a su canción. Y en el segundo, pues sería Donde Hubo Fuego, que es una canción que viene del álbum Los 12 Discípulos, donde Daddy Yankee colabora. y pues sale la frase que Bad Bunny integra también a su canción.
¿A ti te gusta que para atrás para adelante? Este país solo para la gente que aguante. Para atrás para adelante. Esta noche no me sigue, vamos a hacerle cante. Para atrás para adelante. Este país solo para la gente que aguante. Para atrás para adelante. Esta noche no me sigue, vamos a hacerle cante.
Ok. En el caso de Como Antes, es más bien un análisis de qué trata la canción. Es una voz poética que se está refiriendo a una muchacha como cuando estábamos antes, nos hemos dejado, y las imágenes que él utiliza para hacer esta alusión al sentimiento que él siente de haberse dejado con ella son imágenes que hacen de nuevo alusión al mismo periodo de los 2000 a los 2010, donde los que se criaron durante ese tiempo conocemos. Habían blockbusters, él habla de cómo va Blockbuster y alquiló una película, de nuevo Messenger, MySpace, Los Simpsons a las 4 y a las 4 a las 6 porque vamos a ver la Comay super exclusivo, los Game Boy, las estampitas, las peleas de boxeo, y recordamos entonces a Tito Trinidad y los asopados y las peleas, todos los parties de perreo que se daban en las escuelas o en la marquesina o cuando perreábamos, etcétera, ¿no? Todas las canciones de Shakira que ya no son como antes, específicamente esa parte. Así que es toda esa alusión de imágenes que aluden a esa época específica y que el público, por haber nacido también en ese momento, se puede sentir más identificado y puede lograr sentir también ese sentimiento de nostalgia y querer por un instante, mientras escucha esa canción, transportarse a ese momento o bailar esa canción como ese momento, ¿no? Mientras que un público tal vez más joven, yo que doy clase en una escuela, pues sí, conocen las canciones, pero no saben dentro de qué contexto se estaba produciendo esta música. Ellos lo ven como que, mister, ellos hablan cualquier cosa, un corito que se pegue súper rápido y ya eso era una música, pero no era tanto el corito, era más el movimiento, la música, el ritmo. Y esa parte ellos no logran entenderla tanto. Nada, más bien era esa idea de reflexionar sobre las canciones y de cómo este patrón ya se está observando en otros traperos que están surgiendo, y diría yo Darel, Jung, Mike Towers, por ejemplo, ya todos ellos siguen el mismo patrón de incluir o hacer alusiones a estos reggaetoneros que fueron icónicos en su momento y que pudiésemos decir que son el canon del reggaetón en Puerto Rico, y cómo entonces pues esta alusión al canon ya le da un valor distinto y podemos entonces empezar a hablar de una nueva generación de música urbana o de música trap o de reggaetón en el aspecto local. Y ya, eso era. Bye.
Okay, the last presentation in this session before our questions is Building the Devil Discourse in Ngungi Wa Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross. It's by Francis Lee Gonzalez Rosado.
To get the slides, advance the slides. That's for the virtual audience. This is for the present audience.
Okay.
And try not to move the microphones because they get really
Okay,
noisy.
great. Thank you. All right, so good afternoon. Is everybody listening to me? Yes, yes, good. We are good. So I would like to begin by giving a very succinct account about the mind and the person behind Devil on the Cross. And Ngugi wa Thiong'o, other than being a world-renowned author, he is also a political activist. He identifies as Marxist-Leninist, and he is also a dramatist. Actually, I'm a doctoral student specializing in Caribbean literature with a focus on drama. So in 1977, when he co-wrote a play titled I Will Marry When I Want, yes, that sounds revolutionary in itself. The message behind that play was so upsetting for the Kenyan vice president of the time that he had him imprisoned. And my favorite anecdote about Devil on the Cross is that he wrote the entire novel on toilet paper in his native language, which is Gikuyu. For the purposes of this presentation, since I know that I'm pressed on time, I will try to breeze through it and be as clear as possible. Okay, we changed it. So let's see. The novel, I think, is a very excellent exercise in social cultural dominance. For the purposes of this presentation, we might define social cultural dominance as the enhancement or legitimization of certain myths attributing to certain populations. Let's say, for example, who do we think, thanks to the constant bombardment of the media and other ways of communication, who do we think is superior? Who do we criticize? And also, let's take into account that the devil, according to the Catholic Christian Bible, is also the first rebel, as we know. So the devil usually is portrayed as a figure of otherness, as a figure of rebelliousness, and as a figure of questioning. Okay, Jeffrey Burton Russell is one of my favorite authors and academics because he approaches religion and religious tropes and imagery from the viewpoint of a historian in ways that, let's say, a clerical person or a theologian would. Because he thinks his approach is that religion, much like human nature, is constantly on the move. It's constantly evolving. So if we accept that the belief system that we either adopt or we learn from our parents or from the people that we know, then we're able to change it internally. But these changes are not only internal processes, there are also external processes going on as well. So in Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross, that imagery is associated with the devil that is used to underscore many of pre- and post-independence Kenya's problems, such as unemployment, underemployment, class struggles of every kind, racial discrimination in particular, fraud and extortion, gender-related harassment, including rape and sexual abuse, and political corruption. So, let's say, I'm going to point out two key things in the quote that I'm showing to you. One of them is Sunday, and we often construe Sunday as the day of rest, the day that we're not supposed to do anything. It is also the day of worship to many people. But the funny thing about that is that the character, who is Jacinta Waringa, is spending her Sunday, even though she's a devotee, in a golf course. What do we think when we talk about, or when we think about golf courses? That they're the places of millionaires. That's quite the juxtaposition there. And that's actually what I love about this novel, because it is not only the element of fiction that's important, it's also the dramatization of the text. Okay, so people wear crosses or they wear other symbols or other things that they choose. We could argue that they do so because they feel comfortable, because there's a sense of belonging that they feel. And that's perfectly okay. But we have that, and we have the other aspect of that people feel that they have the right to criticize, and they have the right to challenge and to question why they wear them. And most people, they won't be able to most of the time answer fully why they choose that, because that's a subconscious process. In other words, what I'm trying to say, most of the time, when you question why someone believes, usually it comes across as poor taste. And that's when the debate is over. That's when most discussions about religion are over, at least in the public sphere. So we have the symbol of the cross as a symbol of hope because it is not wrong, essentially, for people to believe, because that's part of human nature. But there's also the sense or the meaning of the cross as punishment. There are still countries that practice or enact crucifixion as punishment. And most of that results in exhaustion, asphyxiation, even death, of course. And in Roman times and now, it is meant to humiliate the victim or the criminal in that sense, however you may want to look at it. And let's see. Nevertheless, Devil on the Cross is a subversion. It's an upturning of what the cross means and what religion means to people as a form of discourse. To crucify the devil is to raise awareness in the form of lexical semantics. Lexical semantics is basically what do we mean to say and how we can interpret it against, and in the case of the novel, this is used against all the crimes committed against the middle, lower, and poor working classes of Kenya. Okay, I would like to focus on the last sentences of the quote that I'm showing. The devil was clad in a silk suit. This is why imagery and attention to detail is so important, because it's like what Yongo is telling you how to see the characters and how to engage with them. Because the point of the novel is to encourage critical thinking, not just that you're reading it. And he carried a walking stick shaped like a folded umbrella. One might interpret that as the devil is white or is European because he can't be under the sun. On his head, there were 7 horns, 7 trumpets for sounding infernal hymns of praise and glory. That is the use of numerology, which is very common in religious texts. And I also want to focus on the following. Near the cross, he began to tremble and turned his eyes towards the darkness, as if his eyes were being seared by the light. It sounds as if he's almost suffering from photophobia, in a sense. He moaned, beseeching the people not to crucify him, swearing that he and all his followers would never again build hell for the people on earth. That last part almost sounds like a political catchphrase. If you accept me, since I'm in a position of power, if you accept me, if you validate me, if you approve me with your vote, I will promise you that you'll never have all these problems again. And as you are already noticing, this whole discourse building is based on a series of dualism. What do we perceive as hopeful? What do we perceive as good? What do we perceive as normal versus the things that we might dare or not to criticize because we assume that they're bad for discursive purposes. Like, for example, the devil is depicted as black because in the context of colonialism and imperialism, blackness is othering. We define by opposition. And it is not only a symbol of moral evil, but as an often misconstrued, misleading, and also misinformative sense of identity that needs to be either eradicated or erased depending on the narrative. Let's see. Let's say. Okay. The Virgin Mary, Jesus, and God's angels were white. like Europeans. You notice the emphasis there? It's a very clever way of putting it, but the devil and his angels were black. Again, you have the oppositional theme going on, how these dualisms coexist. Okay, these are also my favorite parts. But the colonized subjects see both the wrongs of the colonizer and those in themselves. So in the end, they try to rationalize, or they try to find comfort, or they try to find a purpose for what everything means that surrounds them. Because they rationalize the colonizer as the figure that needs to be given purpose, even though within their power, they already have a purpose, which is to oppress. So, I'm going to read, and nitpicking. The devil, with skin as white as that of a very fat European she saw once near the Rift Valley Sports Club. Again, we can connect that to the golf course moment that we had at the beginning. Being crucified by people tattered in clothes, like the ones she used to see in Bondeni. And after 3 days, when he was in the throes of death, almost there, but not quite, he would be taken down from the cross by black people in suits and ties, and thus restored to life, he would mock Waringa. This hints at classicism in some sort of way and economic disparity. What's more interesting about that part is the not so subtle implication that the colonial subjects may also antagonize each other by becoming loyalists to the master, if you will. Okay, so I'll try to breeze through that. I'm going to zone in on gentrification. Gentrification can go beyond the racialized concept that we know about it. It may also imply, let's say, having a particularly sounding nice last name, sorry. Maybe your last name sounds Eurocentric, maybe your last name sounds Americanized in some way, living in some places that people deem nicer than others, being in a position of power where all that matters is who you know versus what you know, the kind of connections that you have, particularly socioeconomic, of the socioeconomic kind. And all of that can be used to coerce people from, let's say, coerce other people that maybe are deemed less powerful socially, and that is what we usually refer to as privilege. And let's see, look at how professional but threatening this sounds. Make the slightest move to take this matter to the authorities. You start to question, then who is the authority? And we shall issue with a single ticket to God's kingdom or Satan's, a one-way ticket to heaven or hell. In essential, they don't care where they send you, it's just that they can send you. Okay, then we have the formal invitation to the Devil's Feast. If this bears any relation to what people think of La Junta de Control Fiscal, feel free. because from the text, we can gather that usually when we think about people who rob others, people who abuse others, who extort, who punish, maybe in a very personal sense, in a very interpersonal sense even, we don't think that people on the outside can vote for this kind of people, that this kind of abuse doesn't happen. But in reality, it does. And I'd like to point out what it says below. Thieves and robbers then Ilmoral Golden Heights. Again, we have yet another place or another location signifying wealth. Okay, then we move on to fear-mongering. Let's say that fear-mongering, to keep it relevant, we can define that as people who often like to coach others on how to protest when when there's a silent majority that considers themselves as reasonable, and they tell others that they're social justice warriors and that they shouldn't protest in a certain way, that if they destroy private property, then they disappoint their own cause, that sort of thing, that there is a one way or a correct way to keep order or to keep peace. And I'll read. One morning, the man was found hanged in his own house. As you can see, it almost seems like it was a suicide, but it's not. Near the body had been left a piece of paper on which these words were scribbled: "Never play with other people's property." Whenever you're taught that, it means that you need to be a good person in certain moralistic or ethical ways. Okay, then we move to internationalization, which masquerades as economic stability or prosperity. And internationalization in economics is the expansion of trade and corporate entrepreneurship to adapt essential services, such as education. Case in point, charter schools. When people in general, on a very superficial level, think about charter schools, like it has been attempted in Puerto Rico, they usually think about them as, well, they're the better alternative, given what we have here. That people are bombarded constantly about how the system is broken. Therefore, they have a tendency to seek quick solutions to what might be temporary problems. We don't know better. But then again, we are constantly bombarded with ways to construct discourse and to assimilate discourse. So there's the left side. The left side, I'd like to assess that as state-sanctioned irony, because New Black Beauty Nursery School, in a way, it could be interpreted as exotic. And it is for children of VIP Kenyans. Who are those VIP Kenyans? It alludes to Kenyans that are moving upward in the social scale. And it is owned, managed, and taught entirely by Kenyans. But then again, you have to place the question, what type of Kenyans or what type of people are taking care of your children? These are actually valid questions you have to ask, because it's all part of discourse. Kenyan songs, Kenyan lullabies, again, the traditionalist view of how to construct meaning and how to engage people and how to address countries, islands, or civilizations, anything. Cheap in fees, dear in quality. That's a tricky statement right there, because it implies that there are people who might be stingy for a myriad of reasons. And then, bring one, bring all. When you compare it to the statement above, that it is for children of VIP Kenyans, are you really saying that it is basically for all? Not really. But the right side is a clear example of internationalization, because it gets as neutral and as plain as it can be. Modern day nursery school. It could be any school, but the fact that it's modern, it's appealing. Experienced European principle, formally for Europeans only. People might read this ad and think, well, if you don't accept the opportunity that you've been given, then you're just ungrateful. Look at that chance to broaden your view of the world. Here it is. Now open to a few Kenyans as opposed to VIP Kenyans. It doesn't have the same ring to it. Foreign standards as before, you have to question, well, are these people going to actually meet those standards? National language, national songs, and national names banned. Complete erasure of culture, identity, and any kind of loyalty. So foreign languages, foreign songs, foreign toys. English medium of instruction. And I'm going to touch upon that in a bit. So, as a concluding note, I invite you to go on YouTube and look for Ngugi wa Thiong'o's interview on BBC's Hard Talk. For those of you who may not be aware about Hard Talk, it's an interview show about they bring different literary, contemporary, political figures to discuss worldly issues and other serious topics. And what I love about this interview with Wa Thiong'o is that he, in a very elegant and clever way, he shut down his interviewer by stating English is not an African language, because the point of writing the novel in Gikuyu is to actually describe the African experience. And the interviewer basically made an issue that what did he exactly mean by writing the entire novel in Gikuyu, or whether it was worth it, because being a native English speaker, he basically implied that he couldn't understand it. And the interviewer basically used a lot of faulty logic and non sequiturs. Like, for the purposes of the interview, Wa Thiong'o gave an example of, like, let's say, we know that The Little Prince is originally in French, right? So if you translate it into Mandarin, and considering that China is one of the most populated countries in the world, you'd assume that then more people are going to read it. So therefore, the conclusion or the question would be, is Mandarin a Romance language then? Not really. So there's a particular colonialist mindset that when you quantify instead of qualify, because you think that the bigger the numbers or the bigger the relevance, that it must mean that the phenomenon is true, that is also an exercise of social cultural dominance. Because just because you think that certain kinds of civilizations or peoples are by any chance or by any reason isolated, it doesn't mean that they're less. Those audiences are also real. And on that note, I might leave you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Okay, 3 excellent presentations, but 3 presentations that went over time. So instead of having questions right now, I think we just have to go to the next presentation. You'll have your full time, but it'll be 20 minutes for the whole group, yes. But we'll have questions after your presentation. We have one presentation which won't happen after that one, so there's one person who's canceled. So that means that we probably won't be as overtime as we thought we were going to be, but I invite the next group to come up. Okay, so the presentation's titled Resilience and Help Seeking by and for the Elderly. The presentation is by Adriana Alvarez, Miguel Cardona, Cristal Colón, Gabriel Cruz, Valeria de Jesus, Gianni Lugo, and Patria Lopez de Victoria. This presentation has a double slot because it's a group presentation, so that'll be 20 minutes long. It's also up on the screen there. So perfect. But it looks like writing will be a little small. This is for the virtual audience. Okay, this is for the present audience. And
Okay.
this one shouldn't be touched because it makes a really horrible noise.
Okay.
And this is to advance the slide.
Down.
Yeah.
Down. Okay. To advance. Yo voy a tocarlo aquí desde mi celular.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying for our talk. So we are from UPR-RP, and we're a research group that does undergraduate work with the community, and so we've been working with the older adult community for the last year. So our presentation is titled Resilience and Help-Seeking by and for the Elderly, and I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about this, and then I'm going to give the floor to the undergrad research students who are going to who are going to talk about the rest of the research project. All right, so just to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're going to be discussing, we're going to be talking a little bit about the concept of resilience, which is a little bit controversial in Puerto Rico. And then we're going to move our way to talking about the methods, the data, and preliminary analysis of this presentation. So I understand that the concept of resilience is extremely controversial because it's usually associated with this metaphor of pulling oneself up by the bootstraps. Now, we're going to challenge that view. I have a very different view of resilience. We're going to be looking at it from a linguistic perspective, mostly looking at how resilience is not the cause but the effect of action, and action gets done by language and agency. So we're going to be discussing those different topics today. So with that in mind, let me just give you an idea of the town of Calle. So in metro area, like Calle, the life after the hurricane basically return to a little bit more of a back to normal within 2 months or 3. Let's say that by December, at least in metro area, many places already had power, had water, had access to resources, had access to their doctors and medical facilities. The town of Calle was not like that, okay? In Calle we had, let's just say that in the downtown area itself, we did not have power until mid-November. And in the town of Calle, we have maybe about 30 doctors' offices. These offices were closed for the first 2 months after the hurricane. So older people in the town of Calle did not have access to the medical resources that they needed. So looking at this, we're focusing then on these 2 questions we want to ask. Number 1, in what ways can linguists or linguistics work to demarcate resilience in lived experience and help-seeking? And what do language choices tell us about the way we create help-seeking pathways, right? So when I say help-seeking, I mean, how do we actually seek help in terms of our medical conditions or medical assistance, okay? So we use three key concepts to talk about the data. So we focus on interaction and social action. We focus also on narrative positioning and social capital and resilience. So when I say interaction and social action, I basically mean how do we use language to get others to mobilize for us. And when I say this, I focus on how we talk about our troubles. And the way we talk about our troubles in linguistics, at least when we look at language use, has a particular sequence of events. So we're going to be focusing on that. We're also going to be focusing on how we position ourselves. So how do we move within the stories we tell? How do we basically act out or perform our identities? And then how does social capital, or that connection that we have, those networks, those kinships, those friendships, help us to build resilience? So we're going to focus on these 3 concepts. And with this, I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor over to our undergraduate students who are going to talk about the rest of the research.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Cristal, le estaré presentando la data. Realizamos reclutamiento entre grupos en Calle, adultos mayores, cuidadores y profesionales de la salud. Los entrevistamos utilizando la entrevista semiestructurada, la cual es un instrumento narrativo. La entrevista narrativa se enfoca en las estrategias para buscar ayuda o dar ayuda en 3 puntos: inmediatamente después del huracán, unos meses después del huracán y recientemente. Ahora Miguel le estará presentando los 3 casos que estaremos discutiendo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start talking about the experts of each of the participants, I want to clarify that all the names given here are pseudonyms. The data can also be obtained online as well. You may use your phones to scan the QR code or go to bit.ly/Caribe Plurilingüe 2019. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to either enter to the site or scan the QRs. All right, let's start with the first case. Before we analyze the data of the first participant, I will give you a brief background. Ernesto is a 73-year-old male veteran living in the town of Cayey. He told us about his experience seeking medical help after the hurricane. Previous to this exchange, he told us that his regular doctor was replaced by a new one right after the hurricane. This new doctor did not know about his health history, making it difficult for Ernesto to engage and receive the help he needed. The new doctor solely focused on the problems that she deemed most critical. The following experts will give us a clear idea of his situation.
Que por medio de María se me subió a Recinto. El azúcar, me fui al patio y estaba en el patio, mi esposa estaba trabajando, ¿verdad? Y me desmayé en el patio debajo del palo de mango y estuve 45 minutos allá atrás. Hasta que yo mismo me levanté y vine para acá, estando en el hospital, porque pegué a desmayarme y a caerme después. Todo se me fue de cantazo. Y mi esposa dijo, lo siento, yo me voy a jubilar, me voy a salir del trabajo para cuidarte. Y lo ha hecho, llevo un año que se quedó conmigo, no ha vuelto a trabajar. O sea, por falta de que hubiera alguien allí que me tratara, me diera, esta es la manera para que tu mente, tu cerebro descanse y te dé un poquito en paz. Yo le llamo falta de reconocimiento médico, porque la salud no se juega, yo estoy jugando para mí.
Buenas tardes, soy Valeria de Jesús. Una de las herramientas para el análisis es observar los problemas que nos indican o cómo hablamos o describimos los problemas que nosotros mismos hemos vivido. Ernesto aprovecha esta oportunidad para contar sus problemas en la búsqueda de ayuda médica luego del huracán María y nos enumera sus problemas de salud, que son su corazón, presión arterial y diabetes. Esto se organiza alrededor de una secuencia de pronombres que actúan como formulaciones de casos extremos, como podemos ver en la primera y última línea. Según Pomratz, las formulaciones de casos extremos son utilizadas por un hablante para legitimar las afirmaciones hechas en la narrativa. En este caso, Ernesto no solo utiliza la palabra nadie para legitimar el momento por el que está explicando este problema en el primer lugar, el motivo digo, sino que también quiere legitimar su contradicción dentro de la historia, porque realmente a alguien sí lo atendió, a él sí lo atendieron, sin embargo, no le brindaron la atención que realmente le estaba buscando, que era un profesional de salud mental. En la segunda parte de este extracto, Ernesto usa el discurso informado para dar voz a los demás. La autenticidad es cuestionable, pues no sabemos si realmente pasó de esta manera. Tiene el propósito de brindar más apoyo al argumento del orador, así como de señalar características que a menudo se asocian con la ayuda de los comportamientos en nombre de los médicos. En este caso, los informes hipotéticos en las líneas 22, 23 y 24 sirven para que Ernesto transporte a la audiencia a un contexto alternativo donde los médicos escuchan las preocupaciones genuinas de los pacientes sin asumir sus necesidades. Ernesto está evocando la imagen de un doctor que escucha, que entiende los problemas del paciente y los resuelve sin dudar. Pero esto fue algo que no sucedió en su caso. Ahora los dejo con la compañera Adriana.
Thank you, Valeria, and good afternoon. I will now be talking about the caregiver. We interviewed Eva, who lives in Calle in the district of Montellano. She is 56 years old and cares for her 83-year-old mother, who has Alzheimer's and suffered from several strokes after the hurricane. Some of the issues and concerns that arose after the passing of the hurricane were the fact that they didn't have power for almost an entire year, so she could no longer take care of her mother and had to find a municipal home for older adults in Calle below the poverty level. With this case, we want to present how Eva was able to mobilize herself to get the help that she needed for her mother. And in this particular excerpt that we have here, we will see how she went to the emergency center that was located in Calle, which is where FEMA, the mayor, and all the help was centralized at the time to try to find a solution to her problem. We are now going to be playing the excerpt, and then Gabriel is going to give us the analysis on the participant.
Bueno, pues tuve que hacer, hablar con los de la guardia, los militares, porque no dejaban entrar, o sea, porque todo era con calma, o sea, porque había mucha gente desesperada, pero yo también estaba desesperada, pero como yo le dije a mi guardia, le dije, y tú te sabes porque es mi mamá. No, pues tú te sabes, pero calma, que viera usted que el grupo ya formó, si tú no le dejas entrar. Y mamá está bien malita. Todavía en casa, pero allá que me encuentro con esa gente de FEMA y todos esos militares, pues uno dice, ¿a quién usted busca? Y yo le dije, al alcalde. Y él me dice, está en una reunión. Yo le dije, pues no me importa, tú me dejas pasar. Pues el Rolando, que venía así, ya que salió de la reunión, me dice, Eve, ¿qué tú haces aquí? Yo le dije, entre llanto, le dije, mi mamá está bien mala. Mi mamá está bien mala. Y mi mamá le dio esto. Y, ay, no te quiero. Me dijo, no llores. Me mandaron a otro papel y fue una doctora a mi casa. Llegó una doctora.
So in this excerpt, we can see that our caregiver, Eva, is able to exercise her agency to look for medical attention. What is agency? Agency is the combination of flexibility, that is the actions that a person takes on a particular situation, and accountability. Accountability has three elements, that is public evaluation, obligation, and entitlement. Public evaluation is the acceptance or the denial of a person's actions by the public. Obligation is the thing that drives you to take these actions, and entitlement are the things or the reasons that allowed you to take this action. We can see that in this excerpt, these three elements play a role. In the case of public evaluation, she justifies her actions by comparing her urgency with the urgency that the other people had. The thing that is obligating her to take action is the relationship that she has with the person that needs the medical attention. It's her mother. Also, the entitlement, she justifies it by telling the police officer that her mother is really sick. We also see that she uses the pronoun "tu," an informal pronoun, to refer to the officer. This means two things: that she can exercise this agency to call him this way because she knows that he is younger than her, and two, that she is using this to try to eliminate any hierarchy between her and him, any power, so she is equal to him, so she is entitled to this help. She's able to exercise this agency, and by being proactive in her decision making and avoiding any intermediaries between her and the mayor, she's able to get the mayor to act on her behalf. Eva uses language to mobilize him. So in the words of Enfield and Seinfeld, language can be used as a sort of tool to elicit that response in another person. Eva elicits that response that she is looking for, medical attention, by calling to action the mayor and implementing semiotic resources like crying and a different intonation when she cries. She is able to get the help that she needs for her mother. By telling the mayor, she makes both parties socially accountable, and both are goal-driven to get this help for her mother. Now I will leave you with Cristal, that will be presenting the third participant.
La participante Yadira tiene 30 años de edad Reside en el pueblo de Sidra, pero trabaja en Calley como trabajadora social en una organización sin fines de lucro, ofreciendo sus servicios en la comunidad Matón, en Calley. Luego del huracán María tuvo dificultades para proveer los servicios y conseguir la ayuda, porque no había buena comunicación, no había comunicación. Las ayudas que conseguía y podía ofrecer muchas veces fueron escasas y no cumplían con las necesidades de las personas de la comunidad. El último recurso que utilizó, en algunos de los casos que estaba trabajando, fue referirlo al departamento de la familia, los cuales no fueron atendidos con prioridad y pasaron muchos meses sin ser atendidos.
El departamento de familia no responde a veces pasan 4 meses y todavía no han visitado el caso. Y eso me pasa mucho con María. Si eso pasa cuando todo está normal, imagínense post-María. O sea, es horrible. Entonces, es como ¿qué tú puedes hacer? O sea, si la agencia que se supone que trabaje en esos casos de emergencia social no aparece, uno trabajando como emergencia social, que uno lo que espera es que por lo menos de 24 a 48 horas haya alguien ahí evaluando el caso. A veces pasan 3 meses y medio. En un caso en particular que yo referí de una paciente, un solo hijo, el hijo vivía en Los Altos, pero el nieto vivía con ellos y el nieto era usuario. Y las condiciones eran infrahumanas. La señora me llegó, todos sus medicamentos estaban expirados, pero ella se los estaba tomando como si fueran los medicamentos. Yo referí ese caso, nunca lo visitaba y traté de darle seguimiento dentro de lo que yo podía. Entonces el nieto, al ser usuario, cuando venga uno a entrar, pues entonces rápido, o sea, como que con estas miradas y con unas actitudes un poco, ¿sabes?, desafiantes, por decirlo así. Una mujer sola en la comunidad, pero es un poco difícil. El señor murió 3 meses después. Que a veces yo me pregunto si ellos hubiesen llegado a tiempo y hubiesen evaluado la situación, tal vez el señor no hubiese muerto, porque pudo haber sido por cuestiones, ¿sabes?, naturales, pero recibió un tratamiento a tiempo. Se estaba tomando un medicamento como pero la señora se lo estaba tomando expirado. Tal vez se lo estaba tomando expirado y no, ¿sabes?, alguna condición empeoró hasta que él murió. O sea, que fue bien.
My name is Gianni Lugo, and I will be giving you the analysis to Yadira's case. Agency, again, is the flexibility and accountability to take action. In Yadira's excerpt, we can see both agency and lack of agency. First, she displays lack of agency in lines 5 and 9, and she also displays agency in line 8. It seems like Yadira frames a world where she has her hands tied, with very little possible action, flexibility, and accountability on her behalf. She conveys this with her words, but also with her choice of discourse markers, such as tú sabes and pues. She does not say tú sabes 2 or 3 times, but 7 times. The use of tú sabes or you knows indicates that the speaker and the audience share common ground, or to get the audience to accept something for what it is. In this excerpt, Yadira does both. She includes us and establishes common ground. We all lived this and know what it was like. Her goal is to achieve a shared understanding, because tú sabes just gives us the sensation that we were there and that we align with what she says. We do not only get new knowledge, but we get to understand and accept the situation for what it is. She also uses hypothetical speech to convey possible worlds. According to Semino, Short, and Wynne, hypothetical speech are projections in the minds of participants in the narrative, or in the minds of narrators. Hypothetical language, in this case, is a means to communicate and achieve a shared goal. But what happens when that tool does not work for both parties? The Department of the Family is not answering her request because, sadly, the Corps of Social Workers is overwhelmed by the volume and severity of cases. This leaves us with hypotheticals, what ifs. What if things were done on time, but these things are out of her reach because she does not possess the social capital to translate into agency. Now I will leave you with Gabriel, who will give you the discussion of the presentation.
Moving forward to the discussion, as we have noticed in these cases, social capitals as a means of building resilience is deeply tied with agency and the language usage to mobilize participants. In the three cases, we can see that they all have a level of social capital, some being higher than others. In the case of Ernesto and Eva, we can see that they have a kinship type of social capital. This allows them to exercise and have a wider range of agency. The only participant that has a direct connection with the mayor is Eva. She's able to use him to mobilize that medical attention. By this, and by her involving him in her situation, she makes him goal-driven, like her, to look for this medical attention. By mobilizing, she's able to get this medical attention for her mother, thus allowing her to bounce back or have a greater resilience than the other participants. We can say that in these cases, resilience building may or may not happen due to the social capital that one possesses. In the cases where the participants had many interpersonal connections with others, their agency and their mobilization was higher. Participants with lower social capital or less social network among families, friends, neighbors, and other people demonstrated a resilience building harder to attain. In the end, we find that resilience is the manifestation of combination of other factors and phenomena. It is not the cause of agency, is the effect. And with this, we end, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, our last presentation for this session. Since one of our next presenter will be the last one for this session, then we'll have questions. The presenter for presentation number 18 is ill. He has laryngitis, so he wouldn't be able to present today. In any case, we'll go to the next presentation now. It's titled Environmental Rhetoric and Natural Disasters. It's presented by Carmen Lourdes Aponte Guzman.
Del centro.
Tienes que acercarte de este porque eso es para la audiencia virtual.
Ah, okay, aquí en el medio. Okay. Good afternoon. My topic is environmental rhetoric and natural disasters. Disasters in the Caribbean have been unfolding for so long that we all face the prospect of becoming indifferent into their implications. Societies respond differently to natural disasters depending on the cultural and social norm. Rhetoric has the power to effectively persuade communication to the audience in words or to visual representation about a particular topic. In this paper, the focus will be on rhetoric as it relates to environment and natural disasters. Aristotle defines rhetoric as inability to each particular case to see a valuable means of persuasion. Regarding the contemporary uses of rhetoric in communication, David George's volume, titled Rhetorical Framework, discusses how words and images used in the media coverage of natural disasters have been deployed for specific ends, targeting different audiences. According to Lloyd Blister, in his work titled The Rhetorical Situation, rhetoric emerges out of a natural context of person, event, object, relations, and the exigent with strongly invites urging. A work is rhetorical, but it is a response to a certain kind of situation. However, rhetorical discourse, especially that surrounding natural disaster, often seem less sensitive to contact, more manipulative of its audience and their preconceived notion about the environment and the people impacted by a given disaster. The words and the images used to despite natural disasters are usually sensational, portraying nature as dangerous and destructive, rather than nurturing and life-giving and portraying those non-European descendant people whose lives are often disrupted by disasters, are passive victims, lawless criminals, or even somehow deserving of their fate. The rhetoric surrounding natural disaster is rife with words and phrases that resonate ideologies that privilege culture over nature and European descendant over people of non-European descendant people, manipulating feelings such as anxiety, fear, and pity. The extreme imagery that often accompanies this rhetoric is focused on death, destruction, and chaos. There are, however, exceptions to these tendencies, such as disaster survivor Giovanni Weeks' title, Volcano, which makes readers feel as they are experiencing everything she went through during and after the eruption of Safari Hills volcano in Montserrat. Her memoir conveys an overruling sensation of sadness as she writes about the eruption affecting real people and real communities. A similar text about the same event of a local perspective is Ian Harvey's article in the Vantage News titled Montserrat, the Pompeii of the Caribbean, where he mentions specific locations covered by actions and includes images that establishes a connection with the audience. These local generated texts are in sharp contrast to the sensationalist coverage of the eruption, to the corporate media, which seems designated to stimulate momentary interest in their audience, after which the disaster is either never mentioned again or is mentioned so often and so sensationally that it leads to disaster fatigue. The media have a responsibility to frame disaster in such a way as to encourage disaster preparedness in the future, especially such natural disaster-prone region as the Caribbean. Here in Puerto Rico, television and newspaper reporting is full of sensational accounts of crime, accident, political interview, while doing little to promote ongoing awareness about possible natural disasters. Instead of promoting such awareness, however, the commercial media places such exaggerated focus on such phenomena as wreckage and looting. For example, the journalist Patrick Cockburn complains about reporting concerning Haiti after the earthquake in 2005, when he states that every disaster has uplifting rescue stories when a few survivors are miraculously pulled alive from the wreckage of houses. Refugees always complain, often with reason, about the slow response of their government and the aid agencies. Even a little looting is reported as a general breakdown of law and order. In Haiti, where the danger was minimized, many correspondents were wearing body armor as if they were on the road out of Kabul. Serpo makes a similar complaint in this article related to the language of panic surrounding isolated cases of looting in the aftermath of a hurricane, where journalists despite survivors are lawless criminals and thieves. He cites Rebecca Solnick, who argues that the journalist rhetoric of disaster has the capacity to focus the narrative on the wrong thing. It may characterize disaster zones as hotbeds for energy as opposed to communities afflicted by tragedy, loss, and hunger. The rhetorical tendency to blame the victim has recently reached alarmingly high levels in relation to Donald Trump. Despicable response to Hurricane Irma and Maria in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In her article, the insider Nicole Inderbinder described how the president had popularized disaster relief in such a way we haven't seen before in terms of how he talks about it in public and how he uses it as a mechanism for advising whatever position he has. That's dangerous. MSNBC journalist Stephen Bannon writes about the terrible job Trump did in the case of Puerto Rico. Despite Trump's appalling response, Bennett states that Trump believes he did a fantastic job in Puerto Rico, with Trump himself saying, yeah, I think we did a fantastic job in Puerto Rico. Bennett's article is accompanied by the now infamous image of Trump throwing paper towels at a crowd in San Juan, according to Inbiner. The president retorted case doubt on how FEMA helped the island. Christopher Garland, in his work titled The Port-au-Prince in New Orleans, Race, Faith, and Practical Suffering, mentioned the work of the Caribbean writer Edwin Dandicat in this way. After Katrina, Edwin Dandicat spoke of the link between Haiti's capital and the Big Easy, suggesting that New Orleans looked more like Haiti than the rest of the United States. It's hard for those of us who are from the places like Freetown and Port-au-Prince not to wonder why the so-called developed world needs so desperately to distance itself, especially at times when an unimaginable tragedy shows exactly how much alike we are. African Americans in New Orleans are framed with familiar, especially visual ways to Haiti and Port-au-Prince, partaking in violence and other forms of defiance and criminally evidenced by false reports about multiple raids in the Superdome and numerous murdering, gun-loading, gangs, and Port-au-Prince. Environmental rhetorical relates to the natural disasters and serves particular ends, depending on the ways narratives are told and written, the ways by which stories emerge, the ways in which images are used. The discourse that simplifies media reports on natural disasters rely on previously constructed mental models and social representation of the biosphere and the people's impact by the disaster in order to connect with the audience in a manner that will maximize profit rather than in a manner that occurs despite what is actually happening on the ground. The inevitable sensationalism and stereotyping that result from the type of rhetoric sees those who are experiencing the disaster as passive victims or even deserving of their suffering, and does little to help the audience visualize or understand the real human environmental consequences of the disaster, especially over longer terms. Thank you.
Finally, we have time for questions. So we only have 3 of the presenters left in the room, 3 of the group and the other 2 presenters. So we'll be looking at Adriana's presentation on on Elizabeth Nunez. We're looking at, Francis is not here either, okay. The group from Parte Lopez de Victoria group, and then Carmen Lourdes' presentation that she just made. So we have those 3 presentations in mind when you're asking your questions. Any questions on any of those 3?
For the Puerto group, in what ways would you say the community was already an at-risk community before Maria, and that because they were already at risk, Maria exposed those fault lines that brought about the danger. The danger was already there, but it was not seen until barrier came and uncovered all the contradictions within the system that put that society at risk. That's my question.
You have to hand him the mic.
Oh, I forgot to bring the mic to you.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and answer my question. So let me just repeat the question. So at what level was the community already at risk? In Calle, I would say that, and I think that's the case of many of the emergency first responders and the doctors here so far, is that Calle was not prepared. And I think it's partly because Puerto Rico was not prepared. The government was not prepared. They don't have a decent emergency national system plans already. And older people, I will say, that we're going to be talking about in a different presentation later on, is that the municipal government tried to organize as much as possible to basically assist the elderly after the hurricane. So they did prepare, but they under-prepared. They prepared for 3 weeks. So many of the 911 dispatchers would call the elderly before the hurricane and told them, you know what? This is coming. Where you live is unsafe. You need to call 911, have them pick you up. Just pretend you have something that is ailing you so that you can go to the emergency room, so that you can pass the passing of Maria in that space, which is safer than where you are. So basically, a lot of people were not prepared. And if they are prepared, they under-prepared.
I'm just going to affirm. It's true. I mean, it's that I'm a volunteer in it's third. I did third. I'm a third trainer. And besides me, I do other things. Puerto Rico was not prepared. And it's true, FEMA was not prepared. The government was not prepared. Many people were not prepared. But what I do have to affirm is, when I say people is not prepared, I remember I always go and give CERT to different communities, which CERT is community emergency response team. We give it to the elderly, we give it to universities, we give it to schools, we give it to universities, different places, people. And even though they're supposed to have a backpack, right now, May, you're supposed to be having water in your house, they don't do that. You could repeat it, and repeat it, and the people won't do it. That's about the supermarkets. And when the time comes and they say there's a hurricane, 1, 2, or 3 days before, it's all packed up. When if you prepare yourself, and even though I know Maria was nobody expected the difficulty it was, but if you would have had some type of water, food, prepare medication, have receipts without statistics like this, so you could give it to the pharmacy, because as soon as the pharmacy was open, you could take it to them and they could sell it to you. So you, as citizens, the government, a lot of people weren't prepared, and I know they were. And the plan, I know they were, and he knows why. I even had difficulty, but that's another story. And arguments and fights. And but it teaches everyone a lesson. A lesson.
I'm going to answer this because, so one of the things that we have found, so one of the things that we have found, yes, the government underprepared, but there's a phenomenon that my student Gabriel Cruz informed me about. It's
called the bailout effect.
So you, wait a second. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you. No, I forgot to tell you I use hearing aid, I'm hard of hearing, and you're putting your microphone to your mouth and I can't hear you.
Okay.
No, but it's okay, I don't say it, everybody knows. Okay. Okay. No, but you could talk, but don't put your microphone too close to your mouth, okay?
So the bailout effect, just like we had for the economic crisis with the banks in the U.S., where the government basically bailed out the banks from the debt, paying the debt, what they had to pay, right? So the phenomenon is also carried over to natural disaster. So governments underprepare because they know they're going to get bailed out, and this leads to a cycle of corruption. Okay, so it's not just there is a federal government that's going to come and help us and get us out of this, but through it, all kinds of illegal shenanigans and businesses get included. And so then we have a cycle of not only underpreparing, people not being able to access, the government doesn't, and therefore it leads to the cycle of having more corruption and less prepared, and people
But everything, everything exploded with Maria.
Right.
It's just like when 9/11?
9/11.
Yeah, 9/11. Everything, they were prepared everything for all that, and then they changed everything. And now, with everything that's happening with climate change, they have to now be changing everything. It's constantly renovation, and it's changing. Because we're in, climate change is there, and it's already here. It's not coming, it's already here.
And those renovations involve massive spending. So people are waiting.
Massive spending with the people that are close to those in power.
The contractors. The contractors are going to make lots of money from those cycles. Very, very true. Very true. I forgot to mention, I didn't see him in the corner. And there's in the corners, you can ask him questions as well. Okay, so about his presentation as well. So we have, we'll entertain questions about Edward's presentation if you have any. Okay, for Adriana. Yes. So I was interested in the way that you were talking about the pyramid, okay, and how people were placed on that pyramid. So can you go into that a little further, because you had to do it very quickly, but can you talk about that?
Oh yeah, so like the religious hierarchy, or yeah. So when I was reading the novel, I saw some parallels between intersections between the religious hierarchy of Western white Christianity and how we are seen in the Caribbean versus empires. So for instance, you have the Western Imperial Colonial Project and people who represent that, who would establish themselves as God, and everyone else that is seen as less, or whom they regard as less than, becomes then a devil. And then what happened historically is that all these Caribbean islands and people who inhabited these islands became, well, they identified them as less than. So they became immediately devils. And then, even more so, when people in the islands with their new identities and these renegotiations, they started to realize that they were not happy with their imperial colonial way of life. They realized, wait, we need to do something about it. So when they rebelled against these empires, they became the rebellious devils, where then they were mocked, and because people in the Caribbean islands, they were, como digo, the Imperial Project says that people in Caribbean islands cannot be self-sustaining, que no pueden valerse por sí mismos, that they need everything to be done for them, they need to be represented, porque si no hay bendito. And then, when they rebelled, es como que, Dios mío, no podemos creer que esta gente, menos que nosotros, después de que le hemos dado tanto, how dare they be so ungrateful, how dare they turn against us. And it happened in the African continent as well, when people were demanding then their independence and and whatnot. So, for instance, in Puerto Rico, when you say something against these empires, rápido es como que, how dare you, you devil, y te ven como que esta figura mala. So, because empires represent God, and because God gives you everything, how dare you rebel against God?
Looks a lot like Donald Trump and you leave after the hurricane. So in other words, how dare, I gave you paper towels, you know? Yes, so, but this gets into something else. I think that they really you can really tie these two presentations together, because in your presentation, I really, really like the way you problematize resilience and the image of the woman who blew the mayor. And that made her attempts at resilience both successful but also acknowledged. And then to look at the caregiver, and then the way she was talking about how she said, well, una mujer sola, that sort of, and so she didn't have the connections as well. And so that idea of networking, yes, but then there are different types of networking. So in other words, I think the success that the first interviewee had in getting, or the second interview had in getting medical attention, wasn't just about networking neutrally, but actually the level at which she had the network. So, and that ties in with, okay, where are you positioned in that hierarchy? So I'm just wondering if, because I really like the way you're talking about something that most people look at as a universal, an individual kind of thing, where, okay, as a human being, you're supposed to be resilient, and what's wrong with you if you don't succeed, then you're not resilient. But whereas it depends on a whole bunch of different factors, one of them being where you're positioned in a hierarchy. So maybe, do you have any, does that actually connect with anything that any of you have been thinking about? But that was really brilliant what you did. It was excellent. Yeah.
Well, looking at various texts, we identified that this networking, it's connected with the social capital that one has, that word or concept that Pierre Bourdieu works in. It's like you need to know the right people, because we have the third participant that even though she's a social worker, she's supposed to have all these things or connections or supplies that she needs to give to the people. She's not able to get them, but we see that the social capital that our participant number 2 has allows her to even get a hospice, or a place where her mother is taken care of. So it's the professor problematiza, this concept of resilience, because it's not a thing like you're saying that all the people have. It's not that easy. It's not something that you have. Something that you can access if you have the right people, but it's not that easy.
I think also what I was mentioning about the fact of geographical location, and I think you're also mentioning intersections of race, class, gender, the fact that we are in a space, in a supposedly contained space of an island, es una cosa, because you're trying to get access first from this big mass of land, right? Que Estados Unidos de momento te dicen, no, porque we recognize that you're not quite like full Americans, first of all, porque tienen como que another behavior. But then you're in a mountain or in una región de montaña, it also makes it even more complicated. Plus your socioeconomic status, plus if you're a woman, the people you know, your skin color. I think you were also like mentioning and bringing it up, because es como que la idea de resiliencia de que todo el mundo supuestamente tiene las mismas oportunidades, but then wait, what about this, what about that? So it ties in.
And this ties in with what Frances was saying too, because she said when she was talking about gentrification. She said, well, it translates at all different levels, and so one of them, it's just about privilege. So she put it that way, which I think was really good too. Yes, Dr. Kuwabong?
What was I going to say? Oh, that in cases of natural disasters, there is a theory that you can have altruism development, but you can also have a re-emphasis of gender roles within the society. And the research talks about caregiving, looking for food, cooking, water, that is mostly then women take up this role to return the society back to a kind of order, a kind of presumed natural order. But then after the initial period, the immediate period of post natural disaster, when everybody is scratching around, the women specific gender roles from the male, the patriarchal structure are reinserted and reinforced. So I don't know whether in the research this also seems to come out.
That's a really good question. And yes, I think that we have seen some of that. But then traditionally, the caregivers in Puerto Rico are typically women, right? So most of the caregivers that we have interviewed, I think I would say all of them are women, right? No, we have one male, that's the only one. So the exception would be that one that we played, Eva. She was very determined. She does not meet the stereotype of women in that sense, right? So she has this deep, a very big vehicle to get around town, and she would tell us, before we started even interviewing her, how she would get in her Jeep, and she's not scared of anything or anyone or anything that gets in her way. She will get in her Jeep and just go through the city and get what she needs. She would need at that moment. So I think that bravado that she had, like this beyond her agency, she was not scared. She was determined that she needed help from her mom and from her dad, and she was going to do whatever it took to get that.
Yeah. Okay, this one for Edgar. Edgar, do you think that nostalgia might, in some cases, be a sign that a particular period of intense creativity, of a kind of cultural blossoming is over, and people are looking back at that in a sort of a vacuum? So could you see that? Could you see any of that at play here? A lot of times when you get into nostalgic sort of art forms and paradigms, often it's because people don't sense that in the present that they're living, there's the same kind of creativity or stimulating. The environment has become maybe a bit stale or a bit less stimulating and exciting as previous periods.
Yo pienso que sí. Primero, yo estoy usando a Bad Bunny como un ejemplo, pero no es algo que ocurre solamente en su música. Yo tomo, pues, me parece que Hollywood en los últimos años también se ha estado nutriendo de lo que es un sentimiento de nostalgia y ha traído a muchas películas que han salido en los últimos años que hacen referencia a los 80. Si los 80 hizo referencia a los 50, pues nosotros estamos haciendo referencia a los 80, porque ya pasó una generación. Nuestros padres se criaron con un canon de películas que ahora es el Hollywood que está produciendo películas que hacen alusión a los 80. Parte de Future, Star Wars, incluso la nueva saga de Star Wars es como toda una explosión de nostalgia a los filmes originales. So, el caso de Bad Bunny es como pues, me parece que ya se puede hablar del final de una generación, maybe, que ya pasó toda una generación, está comenzando una generación nueva que está mirando hacia la música que se estaba produciendo en los 2000 o que son productos de esa música que se produjo en ese periodo, como en el caso de Bad Bunny. Y lo que, para conectar con la audiencia, lo que hacen es hacer referencia a ese periodo específico.
Yo estoy, ok, sí, pero podemos decir que no es únicamente bueno, cuando dices es el fin de una generación, entonces podemos también suponer que si estamos hablando del fin de una generación, porque bueno, no es lógico que, bueno, es que en cada día hay algo que empieza y algo que termina, entonces hay un sentido en el ambiente que hemos pasado como un periodo muy productivo, ahora estamos en un periodo de decadencia o algo así. No sé si eso se siente en la música o en el...
Yo pienso que en el caso de los 2000, que es este periodo en donde se está desarrollando la tecnología, donde va a haber un boom, donde la internet comienza a desarrollarse a su potencialidad, donde comienzan a surgir los teléfonos, todos estos electrónicos que damos por sentado a partir del 2010, que esta generación que nace ya lo da por sentado, mientras los que nacen a finales de los 90 están todavía viendo esa transición. So, hay una nostalgia a ese periodo porque es distinto. Ya la tecnología está dado por sentado en la sociedad, que los que experimentaron esa transición tecnológica sienten una nostalgia por eso que pasó. So, es más o menos comparable con la generación de los 80. Los 80 también hubo un boom de producciones musical, teatro, de cine, de cuanto a diversas formas de arte que fueron un pico. Y luego, de momento, se paró y luego surge de nuevo. So, creo que sigue siendo fluctuante constantemente.
Bien. Lamentablemente no tenemos tiempo para más preguntas. Vamos a avanzar a las próximas presentaciones. So let's go to the next presentation. This is the final session. And as I said, one of the presenters is not present. So from the last session. So we're just a little bit over time. We'll probably be ending about 10 minutes after the time we're supposed to allow for questions. The next presenter is Héctor Mercado Susi. His presentation is on technology and its depiction in Caribbean and African literature. Para avanzar la diapositiva aquí. Okay. Y eso es para la audiencia virtual. Audiencia presencial.
Okay, so my name is Héctor Mercado, and today I'm going to be talking about technology and its depiction in Caribbean and African literature. I'm going to base this presentation around the genealogy of the concept of technology, history of technology, technology in a colonial context, and its depiction in Caribbean and African literature. Technology is a relatively new term as we know it. Currently, it involves innovation as the dominating concept. Its narrative classifies the ages of humanity, and some may argue, determines human interactions and not the way around. The concept arises from the notion of technique, which makes reference to the capacity that humans have to solve problems by materially transforming the world. This capacity arises from the necessity in order to survive. As such, it is intimately tied to the subject acting on the environment, the resources that are available, and the problems that arise in a particular environment. Technique presupposes a given knowledge and of the world and in turn builds on that knowledge. The accumulation of techniques develops systemically and can be conceived as the empirical source of scientific knowledge. Technological developments can manifest themselves not only in artifacts with a physical body, but also in modes of organization and systems, as in the case with written language, political systems, institutions, and agriculture. Okay. Prior to the pre-Socratic philosophers, subjects appealed to mythical narratives to explain nature. The very transmission of this knowledge presupposes systemic techniques such as those found in oral tradition. These include creation myths that explain the origin of things and justify collective missions, divine conflicts that mirror the human condition and justify a social order, conceptions of justice, property, values, and customs that provide rules of social behavior and justify the social order. Also, we have rites that reflect these narratives and attempt to influence and or transform the world. We have sacrifices, rite of passages, invocations, healing practices, funerals. Anyway, these are systemic techniques that in turn add or modify the very narratives they reflect. The pre-Socratics attempted to explain nature in a rational manner. Nature seen as physis. This rational mode of argumentation, or logos, brought about causal explanations of nature. This claim of progression from myth to reason applies to a Western narrative which in itself is a myth as it explains the world with its own strategies to transform it. Here we have a brief list of pre-Socratic philosophies: Thales of Miletus, Parmenides, Heraclitus, Pythagoras, and Anaxagoras, and some of the general ideas that they developed. Post-Socratic views, so here we have some post-Socratic views on types of knowledge and social class. We have episteme, which implies that theoretical knowledge is the highest type of knowledge and therefore worthy of the philosopher's attention. We also have techne, which implies that technological knowledge is a lesser type of knowledge and therefore worthy of the slaves and other laborers. Romans elevated, we also have the Roman elevation of technical knowledge. Technical knowledge development becomes the foundation on which the Romans will build their empire. And this is seen in their aqueducts, the roads, the ark, and many weapon developments. Okay, so Homeric epics are characterized by the systemic use of the following elements. So this is as a technique, as a mode of, as a mode of memorizing. We have the dactylic hexameter as a rhythmic meter to aid memorization. Invocations to legitimize divine nature of narratives, rhetorical figures that selectively emphasize value descriptions. We have epithets, similes, etc. Catalogs and lineages to provide a sense of material truth. We have single combats, labors, and dissensions to the underworld and other realms to highlight heroic deeds and desirable social traits. And we have conflicts such as war, property, transgressions, and flaws that highlight the human condition. On the other hand, we have oral tradition as a dynamic, as being dynamic and adapting to the spatial temporal context and thus being ever-changing. Writing, on the other hand, attempts to eternalize the physical manifestation of any given expression of knowledge. Nevertheless, it does not remain unchanging forever due to the very arbitrariness of meaning, the evolution of language in time, the differences in regional dialects within the same language, and translations into other languages. With the invention of the press, knowledge becomes an accessible product that connects individuals across space and time, drastically accelerates dispersion of ideas, and transforms discursive techniques. Here we have a list of technologies that were developed by those various empires. We have the Egyptian, the Mali, and the Zimbabwe. So I'm just going to scroll down to continue because there's little time. Okay, so we also have Islamic technologies, basically in math, algebra, trigonometry, algorithms, their architectural institutions, using sacred texts as a colonizing tool, navigational technologies, and rescuing and developing the techniques lost to Europe. So now I talk about the transition from the Islamic to the Iberian Peninsula and what will become colonial technology. So we have gunpowder is introduced to Europe in the 13th century CE and is refined for maximum efficiency during the following centuries. This will be crucial in Spain's initial conquest of the Americas, since they will have a technological edge over their native counterparts. By the end of the 15th century CE, and after 7 centuries of Islamic influence, Spain succeeds in expelling the last of the Islamic sultans out of its territory. This period coincides with the unification of the Spanish crown under Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabel of Castile, the one behind the sponsorship of Christopher Columbus's voyages to the Americas in 1492. Having incorporated Islamic navigational technology throughout the centuries, Spain establishes itself in the Americas, an endeavor that will be followed by the other soon-to-become European empires. So here I have a list of technological developments by pre-Columbian cultures, more specifically the Inca, Maya Azteca, and the Taino Caribe. So I'll keep going. Okay, so here we deal with the slave trade and the plantation technologies. We have the incorporation of Islamic navigational technologies, slave-based labor, organizational strategies in a triangular exchange cycle, discursive techniques of exploitation, and there we have the Bible, divide and control tactics, banning expressions of native cultures such as languages, music, etc. Coercive techniques of exploitation, which include weapons refinement and torture mechanisms, viewing the slave as a replaceable part of machinery, plantation design for mass agricultural production, cultivation, harvesting, preparation, and for processing, and their products, more specifically sugar, cotton, coffee, and tobacco. Okay, so in Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross, technology is seen as the expression of neocolonialism. Access to it is proportional to social class. It incentivizes the propagation of the status quo, its beliefs, and foreign interest. So inasmuch as we're speaking about propaganda, we have the use of the Bible, the flyers, and the matatu public transportation, which becomes a space where people interact and exchange knowledge. Technology also plays a role in highlighting inferiority in the colonized and incentivizing assimilation through its aesthetics products. We have the main character, Waringa, who uses bleaching creams, clothing that contrasts with the color of her skin, and hair straightening techniques. So this is just one example of technology in African literature. So to contrast that, we talk a little bit about technology in the Caribbean literature. In Lisa Allen Agostini's Home, Migration and the Diasporic Experience are consequences of colonialism. This state of transitional existence creates a crisis of identity in the generations that follow, as well as in the interactions that result between the hosting country and their land of origin. In the 21st century, information technology redefines this diasporic subject. So within the novel, we have the use of social networks, more specifically Skype, diffusion of popular culture, more specifically in music. We have the main character who is struggling with mental illness, and here we have an interaction with psychological services. So we have drugs, thoughts on mental illness, and suicide triggers. And we also have spatial sites of interaction, which include department stores, private spaces, and cyberspace. And by private space, I mean sitting in front of the computer. Okay, so in conclusion, we have seen the development of technology through the notion of technique, its transition from myth as a mode of explaining the world and transforming it through rites, rational modes of explaining nature through the concept of logos, episteme, and techne. We explored the manifestations of technology in Western, Islamic, African, pre-Columbian, and colonial contexts, and we also saw examples of how technology is depicted in both African and Caribbean literature. So, that would be all. That's my bibliography, so thank you very much.
All right, now we're at our last presentation. It is called Colonial Desire and Dubious Sukuyan, Agency, Gender, Sexuality, and Counter-Narrative in Maryse Condé's Who Slashed Celine's Throat by Raúl Vázquez Vélez.
Here goes. Set at the dawn of the 20th century, Who Slashed Celine's Throat revolves around the lives and deeds of Céline Coupé, neck cut, Panso, an African Guadeloupean woman who works as a missionary in West Africa during French rule. Infamous for her mysterious origins and practically non-existent sexual morals, the woman with the purple scar uses her sexuality to control European officials to the lowest half-caste servants by skillfully manipulating silence as well as the needs and desires of others. Thus, Céline renegotiates the structures of power and influence within the colonized society she comes into contact with into a voiceless poem of dreadful delight that enables her to rise above the limits placed upon women at the time, even if doing so means replicating dynamics of colonial subjugation and turning them against their victimizers for her own benefit. Having departed from Lyons to work in French-ruled West Africa, Céline becomes a creolized female subject who returns to the land of her forefathers half a century after the abolition of slavery and the slave trade. Removed from Africa by several generations, she arrives at the Ivory Coast in a position of powerlessness similar to the one she left behind in Lyons. Like many men holding positions of power in French colonial society at the time, her superior, Father Hachad, creeps an appraising look to a woman he considers different from others, suspecting her because she seems to make no effort to construct her own place within the mother country or its territories. Since Céline keeps her emotions and opinions to herself, this makes it difficult for the priest to think anything about her at all, save that her, quote, dark skin that clothes her like a garment of deep mourning, unquote, makes her conspicuously atypical among a group otherwise composed entirely by European women. Having dismissed the oblate as a mere, quote, hybrid of goodness knows how many races, unquote, Hachad cannot define her beyond what little he knows about her life, personality, and work. He cannot forget that Céline comes from, quote, one of those colonies that are only French by name, where the natives have been baptized yet still run wild, swear like heathens, beat the drum, and drink stone liquor, and therefore, unquote, and therefore vitiates his interpretation into a catalog of colonial cliches to which the woman barely seems to accord to. As Silas Kemeggio argues in Maryse Condé and West Indian Complexity, the writer of monstrosity, post-colonial comparativism, and cannibalistic intertextualities, Céline is one among, quote, a veritable anthology of monstrous heroines that populate condensed novels and whose monstrosity endows them with an identity that complicates their integration into any society, unquote. The novel's narrator assumes the guise of a griot or storyteller who gathers all available knowledge, information, stories, testimonies, and miscellany about Selania Neckcut Panso, and crafts an entertaining narrative filled with wit, satire, gossip, sexual exploits, gruesome murders, anything that could possibly titillate an audience. For that matter, Selania is a griot herself, as she controls every event and person in her story with nothing but her own will, desire, and flesh. In The Force of Desire, a Deleuzian reading of sexuality in the writings of René Depestre and Maurice Condé, Christina Kohlberg posits that Condé's work explores sexuality as, quote, a strong but complex force that forces its practitioners to constantly negotiate between freedom and submissiveness, pain and pleasure, unquote. Rather than rehash older readings of the Caribbean and space and place of eternal lack and inextricable misery, Condé problematizes this quote-unquote affirmative sexuality as a response to Caribbean experience that does not have to fulfill an artificially created monk and thus need not envy former or current colonizers at all. Likewise, Selania's schemes destabilize the power structures prevalent in the colonies she operates in, adjusting to their particular social context to achieve revenge against the people that nearly murdered her as a child, as well as against the colonial society that allowed this to happen. The telling and retelling of these events build upon the legend of the woman with the purple scar and strengthen her counter-narrative or resistance and subversive jouissance in the face of hegemonic heteronormativity and female subjugation to men. Even so, these characters should not be deemed exemplary, noble, or inspiring in any sense of these words. Being associated with, quote, darker forces of death and violence, Selania exploits sexuality as an omnipresent force that surpasses individual traumas and places itself beyond moral questions of good and evil, thus anchoring the force of desire in Caribbean history to representation of the personal histories of other characters, unquote. As the anonymous owner of the blog Fight for What's Right argues in Sex, Death, and Magic, the vilification of a woman of color in Maurice Condé, Who Snatched Selania's Throat, Selania is made a scapegoat for Western racism and sexism, as well as somatophobia or fear of and disdain for the body, of bodily functions and desires, and the inability to control them, which leads to inevitable culturally created differentiations between individuals who are more of the body and those who are more of the mind on grounds of race, sex, and class. However, although such classifications present upper-class European white men as more of the mind, vis-a-vis European women, lower-class European men, African women, African men, and other persons of non-European descent, Selania proves to be more of the man than her shot and her fellow oblates credit her for. When the silence of the jungle is broken by quote-unquote a cacophony of sounds, while a band of porters bear the group to Cambassam on the way to Adjamé Santi, Selania gives the impression of writing the autobiography of her soul, thus imitating the future Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. Nevertheless, in reality, the Guadeloupe missionary is recording everything she sees in order to know what she might use to serve her as yet unknown purposes, which makes Selania no different from what explorers deploy to Africa, Asia, the Americas, the Pacific, the Caribbean, and elsewhere have done long before Columbus. Through the act of writing, the future teacher emulates male colonizers that turn West Africa and other parts of the world into plantations to pillage and playgrounds where they could indulge the pleasures they disavowed in themselves and foisted upon the peoples they conquered to justify their exploitation of them. Rather than return to Guadeloupe and assume the lives and deeds of a baptized heathen, Selania heads into the so-called Heart of Darkness to take over the home for half-castes in Adjamé Santi, where she makes sure that female pupils learn the same subjects as males and vice versa. Moreover, The oblate ensures that the home produces its own food and other essentials, freeing it from dependence upon capitalist economies and the interplays of supply and demand that accompany them. Selania's hunger coalesces with the lust for power, wealth, and enjoyment of colonizer and colonized men, destroying them like a succulent that engulfs her victims in fire and flesh, rather than merely draining their life force as a sphere of bodiless light. Being, quote, a mock Frankenstein or post-human creature reborn as a human of African Caribbean descent, Selania is both human and monster, both alive and dead, and consequently a political agent beyond representation by means of productivity, because she weaves her narrative of alternative desire in the face of hegemonic colonial opposition and transcends subjectivity, as the novel and its narrator do not concern themselves at all with what the oblate thinks about herself or anything else for that matter, unquote. Even so, none of these factors make Selania a flat or one-dimensional character, even if much of what the reader learns about her comes from hearsay or folk tales. Despite the controversy surrounding Selania's misdeeds and strange silences, their positive and negative impact upon Adjame Santee and later Guadeloupe is uncontestable, and as shown during her discussion with Hakim. She tells him that the reason behind the current impasse between Africans and the French is their simultaneous fear and predation upon women. Quote, being men, the colonizers could only think in terms of men, and thus invited African men to share in their projects while excluding women, willfully ignoring that African women welcomed change as long as it worked to their advantage, as they were tired of working themselves to death, tired of being treated as subalterns, tired of being humiliated, beaten, and abused, unquote. Like their metropolitan rulers, European colonizers are too focused on gratifying the divergent desires for wealth, power, and pleasure to even contemplate any sort of change, particularly if doing so endangers their own interests. Selania also has nothing to fear from Hakim or any other person in Adjame Santee, just as those in power are utterly absorbed by their petty desires and lusts. The people they rule over are busy subsisting and enjoying themselves one day after day in a social-cultural context built upon racism, greed, and conquest, ever on the prowl to milk them dry of agency, wealth, property, etc. Through her power of dominance, Selania uncovers an earth-shattering truth. European men are as much of the body as any other colonial subject of color. African women prove themselves to be more of the mind whenever they use their desire/desiring flesh to manipulate colonizers and the colonial establishment to work for their benefit rather than their detriment. Questionable as her sexual and non-sexual practices might be, the matter says more about European and African men than it does about Selania Panso and women. Neck-cut Selania is a phantasm of flesh that invades the mind, body, and soul of those she wishes to destroy or otherwise use, attaining her objects of desire with the help of her victims. Whose slash Selania's throats proves time and again that the manipulation of desire and the creation of artificial want and scarcity are indispensable tools for the creation of hegemonic and counter-hegemonic discourses, their power limited only by the strength of subjects' desires, agency, and the lengths they are willing to go to in order to create ties of love and power, along with poetics of alternative relation. Thank you.
Questions?
So the presentation on technology of the Caribbean. I was wondering, have you read, I don't remember, Midnight Robber, a novel by Nalo Hopkinson?
Midnight Robber, no, that one particular I haven't.
I started it, but didn't quite finish it. But what caught my attention was, science fiction in a Caribbean setting where Caribbean peoples colonize a planet all their own, and I don't know what to compare it to. It would be I don't know, it's not Star Trek or Star Wars, it's more like what in Caribbean history who got taken to outer space. You know, these people have house issues where they're basically robot versions of Wikipedia to the max, where you have a question or anything or one information and the house issue gets it for you right away. You don't even have to access a web page anymore. And it's basically how African myths and Yoruba myths and basically the syncretic religions of the Caribbean, for lack of a better term, get transformed into something else entirely in this context. And it's also about the usages of technology in that novel, because the house issues is pretty much also a Caribbean version of 1984, because there are machines everywhere, you know, from birth to death, they're monitoring everything you do and everything you say. It's very hard to trick them. And that's what triggers the rest of the father of the protagonist, the protagonist, whose name currently escapes me, manages to kill the man who was living with his wife by using non-technological means. And that's all I can say to avoid spoiling too much. I would like to hear some of your insights based on what I just told you. I know it's not much, but I didn't finish the novel.
Well, for example, I've read Tobias Buckel's Crystal Rain. Very, very, very interesting book, and the universe that he depicts. I've always thought about the Caribbean. I mean, the very concept of island, right? I mean, a planet in itself is an island, and many of the things that have been done or experimented with in the Caribbean sets itself to be projected in space, whether it is at a solar level, at a galactic level, at a Laniakea level. So I mean, I do believe, exactly, I do believe that many of these things can be projected, can be projected into an ampler level. And, well, I mean, I'm going to take this opportunity, of course. This is something that I wrote 2 years ago, and it basically deals with that. Although it deals with, it is inspired by the student movement of the University of Puerto Rico. It does...
another more recent one, right? I believe there was a presentation not that long ago.
There was a presentation in early 2018, exactly. That's just another cover. That's just, I mean, like a few corrections. I mean, but I mean, it's just another cover. It's not like it's a second cover. But yeah. I don't know if I don't know if I answered your question, right? But
you did.
Okay.
This was an interesting juxtaposition of presentations, because in your presentation very much it was that understanding of technology and technique that comes to the Greeks, which is very much a patriarchal one. But then you see Selene, and what she's very much in control. She's very much able to manipulate her world and change her realities. She's very much in control that way. So, but she's not using that male understanding of how you achieve that. She actually is using other ways of manipulating the world that are just as effective and maybe even more effective. Because in the end, even though the colonial ruling class has a technological advantage, she's able to actually, in a way, subvert the whole system. Whether, yes, in some fundamental way, although not completely change the system. So that was really interesting to me. And I think that if you look at Selene, you can kind of line her up with a set of techniques or a set of practices that can actually transform realities that don't depend on tools. And I think that that's one critique that feminists have of patriarchy, is that basically patriarchy sees creativity only as being possible through tools, because males cannot, some feminists argue that males cannot create without the use of tools, while females can actually create without the use of tools. So there's just a lot of lights were flashing in my mind when Raul gave his presentation really after yours. It was fascinating, just the kind of connections I was making in my mind.
Yeah, about that, and I wanted to ask that, now that you mention it, I'd like to see Selania is a continuation of, older European, monsters. I'm talking Bram Stoker's Dracula, the novel, not the films. And, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Dracula stands out for me because he's not just this evil monster who drinks the blood of maidens and is basically the devil or the reincarnation of Vlad Dracula III of Romania or Târgoviște of Wallachia or whatever it's called, but it's a monster that repurposes human technology, human languages, and human writing for its own purposes. So that's what sets the whole plot of Dracula. He wants to buy a property in Carfax Abbey so he can move to London and have, new hunting grounds. He's basically a one monster colonizer of women. And Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's version, is a man that that doesn't so much create life as plagiarizes it. All he did was reanimate a cadaver and reanimate a corpse. It's not the same as bringing a dead being back to life. And he basically creates a monster, and it's also a combination of alchemy, the books of Paracelsus, which are mentioned. And although the monster himself learns how to speak and presumably to write, and he's basically the most fluent and articulate character in the entire novel, but he doesn't quite use technology the same way Dracula does. And then we come back all those centuries later to Selania, who not only is working as part of a team of missionaries so she can have access to the colonies and use that and basically repurpose colonialism and capitalism and have them work in her own way. But it's also important to indicate what you just said. Selania is no revolutionary. She's not doing this because she hates colonialism and she wants to make a better world for everybody. No, she just wants, her agenda first and foremost is to get revenge on the society and the people that basically made her what she is, the woman with the purple scar, the post-Frankenstein, as one of my sources describes her. She's basically a post-human being playing at being human and duping her former humans into either doing her work for her or falling or becoming her victim, because she has her feeding rates too. That's how she kills Hakim in the novel, either her or somebody like her. But that's what, in my opinion, that makes her even more dangerous than a Dracula or a Frankenstein monster.
Yes, I saw Adriana nodding her head. Was it in response to this? Did you have something to say?
Oh no, it just struck me that when he says that she's not revolutionary because she just wants to get away with her own agenda, I thought that was fun. That was good.
Yeah. Okay, but no, the Frankenstein thing too is interesting because, like you said, it's a plagiarism of life, and I think that that's what this feminist critique would say as well. Is that Claudia von Verhoeven, for example, would say that the goal of alchemy, the goal of the modern scientific or Western scientific endeavor or enterprise is to create life and to make women irrelevant in that process. And so it's the logical and absurd conclusion of that impulse. And so this gets us back to this idea of technique and the way that I'm glad that you brought in some pre-Socratics because they had a different vision of this. But what gets promoted among Greek philosophers and what gets adopted as Western civilization and depicted as the only thing that came out of Greece is that particular interpretation of technology. So that's really interesting.
Well, inasmuch as transforming the world is concerned, rituals also fall under the notion of technology. And I don't know to what extent these rituals are also patriarchal. I mean, yes, that is what eventually becomes, I guess, that is what comes to be known eventually as technology. But going from mythology to the rituals, and from the rituals to more reasonable means of transforming. Got a little bit wrong.
No, I like the way you made that bridge between technology and ritual, and also between technologies of material technologies and discursive technology. That was really nice about your presentation.
That's also another thing, the whole modes of organization, which is also part of.
But with ritual, what you see is like you see a traditional, more indigenous, and I would argue pre-patriarchal approach to ritual, and religion, even if you can call it religion or spirituality, which basically does not divorce the mind from the body, or does not divorce culture from nature. So you have that as a pre-patriarchal one. So when we speak of ritual, we have, if you look at it both, if you look at those two trends, okay, there's the patriarchal trend that turns ritual into something that takes you away from reality. Whereas in a lot of indigenous cultures, you have rituals, but the goal of the ritual, and you also have spirituality, you also have religion, but the goal of spirituality, religion, and ritual is not to take you away from this, but it's actually part of this. And so all of your material reality is infused with spirit. There's no division between body and mind. It's a seamless whole. And how that gets separated through by that particular tradition that gets adopted by the Western dominant paradigm from Greece, that division between truth and falsehood, and spirit and matter, and truth and good and bad, good and evil. So when you get that, of course, that lays the groundwork for monstrosity, because if you've ripped apart spirit from matter, if you've ripped apart mind from body, that opens a space for monstrosity. So so ritual, I think, needs to be looked at from a pre-patriarchal, at least from a pre-patriarchal point of view, where that rupture hasn't been made, and then a patriarchal point of view where once you've got that rupture, then it can be deployed as, like you said, the Bible as a technology of domination and colonization. So I didn't foresee this interesting interplay between these two texts, but this was really fascinating for me. Any other questions or comments on these last two presentations? All right, well, let's give both presenters another clap. And thanks to everybody for staying. The room is a bit chilly. I know for one I'm a little bit friolento, and I'm almost shivering. Also, thank you to our technical team. I think we gave you like 5 minutes for lunch, and now we're over time by I don't know how many minutes. So let's give her a clap. And thanks to all of you for viewing us virtually. We will have another event. It will be Caribe Plurilingüe XIII, which will happen towards the end of next semester, probably in late October. So everybody have a good afternoon, and we'll see you next semester.